The Bitcoin price continues to rally into this presidential election, also the Nasdaq, also the S&P. But will Bitcoin skyrocket? Or will Bitcoin collapse post-election? And depending on who wins, which outcome should we expect? Well, just looking at history, and on Altcoin Daily, we'll always show you the actual data so you have all the information to make the best decision for you. This is the stock market and presidencies showing the S&P 500 price returns on a log scale with presidents and their parties highlighted since 1933. And this is showing us that over the long run, based on history, that it doesn't really matter which party wins, markets tend to go up. But I actually want to go a step further, go deeper than just the superficial. Look at some data that not a lot of other crypto channels are sharing with you. So watch today's whole video. And this is interesting because yes, the prediction market, like on Margex, these are people trading this presidential election. A Trump victory is being priced in, but Harris just in the last 2 days. And you can go back on my video from 2 days ago and look at the numbers then. But there's no question. Harris was in the 30s, high 30s before. A Trump win was in the 60s. Harris is starting to creep up. But let's be honest, whether you're the crypto market or traditional Wall Street markets, it's just a fact that Wall Street is starting to already price in a Trump victory. Billionaire Chamath Palihapitiya, on the latest All In podcast episode, explains.
I think that the short-term takeaway that I have just looking at all of this data is that in the economic distribution of outcomes, this is now tilted overwhelmingly to a Trump win. And this is not an emotional statement or what I want to happen, but this is just an observation of how tens of trillions of dollars of self-interested financial actors have now repositioned their risk. And if Trump wins, which it looks like he's increasingly going to do, and if he wins by the margins that it looks like it's going to do, you're going to see a lot of these things exacerbate. Gold's going to go up more, probably. Bitcoin will probably go up. The short-term economic upside for the economy will probably get reflected in higher equity prices, but it'll also push out long-term rates. The inflation picture becomes a little bit murkier. But I think that that's what's happening. I think that the financial markets are pricing in a Trump win.
So I understand if Trump wins, why equities and why the stock market would go up. But why would gold go up? Aren't those two things, stock market and gold, sort of inverse?
Sorry, just to understand better, why does gold go up in a Trump win?
I think in the short term, what happens is that you see more economic growth, but in the medium term, inflation goes up, and so you want to hedge.
Right.
So it's more about a durational balance of assets. So in the short term, you'll be long the things that will generate earnings, but in the medium to long term, you want to hedge yourself. So Bitcoin and gold, I think, will trade that way.
So just looking at Trump for a sec, then we'll get to Kamala. Then I'll share with you this other chart, which no other channel is sharing with you. But just looking at the short-term effects, if Trump wins in the short term, I would expect a pop. He's running on economy. He's running on business and increasing markets. A pop would make sense. And at the same time, if Kamala would win, I would expect a dip in that short term, but any dip would certainly be a buying opportunity, I think. And just like billionaire Paul Tudor Jones' thesis on inflation, Bitcoin will benefit.
Given all of the things you're saying, are you off buying gold and Bitcoin and
I think all roads lead to inflation. We're going to end up
But does all roads lead to inflation, therefore gold is a good investment? Is Bitcoin a good investment to you?
I'm long gold. I'm long Bitcoin. I think commodities are so ridiculously underowned.
And if you're trading this election event, here are what these standings mean for you. If you were to invest $100 on Trump, you would take home $162 in total if Trump wins. If you are willing to take the underdog of Harris, based on the odds, and trade $100 for her, if she wins, you would take home over $240, meaning the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward, like always. I'll link this down below so you can keep tabs on these odds live. But post-election, what will Bitcoin do? Well, heavily respected multi-international bank, Standard Chartered, has been very clear.
I think we go to fresh all-time highs by the end of this year, no matter what happens in the US election. It would be relatively clear that a Trump presidency should be more positive, given he's been relatively constructive on Bitcoin in particular, but also the broader digital asset space over the last couple of years. So in his victory scenario, I predict we go to 125,000 for Bitcoin by the end of this year. In the Harris scenario, again, I think we do go higher, but to about 75,000 by the end of this year. And that's because Harris is definitely not President Biden. So President Biden has been quite negative on the sector the last few years. Earlier this year, in May, President Biden vetoed the SAB 121 repeal bill that had passed through the House and the Senate. So I think now that the sector has become politicized, if you like, it'll be very difficult for a then President Harris to a similar repeal to what President Biden has done. So again, a somewhat positive story, but a much more positive outcome in a President Trump 2.0.
Another thing to look at is our legislative branch here in the US, Congress, because these elections are taking place as well. Why this matters is if a Democratic president gets a Democratic Congress, it's typically much easier to pass actual policy, get it implemented. Yet, if a Democratic president has an all-Republican Congress, they're just at odds with each other and it's very hard to get things passed. Same thing with the inverse. Yet, looking at the average annualized S&P 500 performance from the 1950s all the way to last year, markets have done the best with either a Democratic or Republican president, does not matter, with a divided Congress in both scenarios. Markets have actually done the second best with a Democratic president and all-Republican Congress, interestingly. The third best with a Republican president and an all-Republican Congress. May be the reason that a Republican legislative congressional branch markets do the best, maybe because less regulation, which leads to more growth. Now, what does the worst, historically, is a Republican president with an all-Democratic Congress. I don't think we have to worry. I mean, anything could happen. Nobody can see the future. I don't think this is very likely in this presidential race, only because the Democrats in the executive branch, Kamala and Biden, are in control now. Typically, when we have the next election, at least one of the congressional branches, House or Senate, tends to flip Republican. Also, let's not forget that BlackRock, as well as the other institutional ETF issuers, have been and currently are aggressively buying Bitcoin. Here's the updated number of Bitcoin held by US Bitcoin ETFs, and BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF has now hit over 400,000 Bitcoin held. If BlackRock's buying, it's typically a good idea to buy. They typically know something. The only thing for me that I could see that could stop this rocket ship of Bitcoin going at least to $100,000 by 2025, if not much more, is if there's a global war of some kind, strikes between nations. And I do think a Trump presidency in a lot of ways would be better for the altcoin market. Bitcoin, and let's say Ethereum as well, their legacy at this point, institutions like them. But for the altcoins, Trump has been more vocal. Although either way, Gary Gensler is going to be gone with either new administration. So in that way, altcoins next year versus altcoins for the past few years, it's going to get better because Gary Gensler is gone either way. I'm refreshing the odds right now. Wow, and Harris did just gain a little more. Like always, see you tomorrow.